I welcome Sue Coulter, and take it away, Sue. And thank you so much for bringing this information to us.
Thank you, Sarah, for such a sweet introduction. Hopefully people can hear me all right. Give me a thumbs up if you're hearing my voice. All right. Excellent. So I just want to thank everybody for showing up, because I know there's plenty of things to be tuning into, and maybe hearing about plastics isn't at the top of the list. So I want to start off first and foremost by just saying that what I'm sharing this evening is just what I have found out through my own personal investigation and my own personal concern and well-being for our precious planet. I am by no means an expert, and I am by no means anti-plastic, because as we all know, we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing right now if it wasn't for plastic. We wouldn't be able to have our cell phones if it wasn't for plastic. We wouldn't be able to have medical materials and all the other things out there that we need plastic for. So what I'm going to address tonight is our overconsumption of the single-use plastic in particular. So Michael Hicks is going to share the screen for me. And talking trash again was the term that the title I decided to give the slideshow. So it was actually exactly a year ago today that I gave my first talk about plastics. And I kind of feel like that was Plastics 101. And this is kind of more of an advanced section on talking trash and what's the latest with plastics. And you can advance to the next slide, please. So outline for my discussion tonight is I want to just give a brief overview of my connection to this topic and why it matters to me. Give a little highlight on the Talking Trash Again program that my former coworker, Michael Brito, and I carried out in the school year of 2022 and 2023. Discuss how did we get here in this plastic wild world that we are in. Cover some of the environmental impacts. Share a little bit about what's going on in California legislatively, bringing in a little bit more of that so we can know how to best use our voting power, because we're out of the point of being able to recycle our way out of this big obsession or this big overload of using plastics. Broaden the lens to DC and what's going around the globe. Of course, highlighting inspirational organizations, because I think that's really important to know. And I can't, of course, cover all of my favorites, but I will definitely showcase some of the ones that are inspiring me with what they're doing. Speak to what Noyo's efforts are in dealing with this issue, and then any key takeaways and any questions at the end. So I think what would work best is I will share what I'm going to share. If you have a real burning urge for a question, Sarah will keep an eye on the chat and she can interrupt me and I'll speak to it. Otherwise, I'd prefer to wait and do it at the end. So overview of my connection. On the left is me with my big brother. And I was the East Coast girl, born and raised in New York, outskirts of Manhattan. So my suburbia was, neighborhoods, climbing trees, riding my bike to the brook. And I'd say the person that impacted me the most in the way of the environment, aside from my own love, was my 5th grade teacher. He was the first person to teach me about recycling, and the big one that stuck with me, which was turning electricity off in the rooms that you're not using. So conserving energy, which I thought it stuck with me to this day. And then over the years, just my love of the outdoors. I moved out to California for a job in outdoor education at a summer camp. And that kind of began what has become 35 plus years of education in all kinds of realms of alternative, everything but public school as far as being a teacher, but sharing my love of nature woven into that. And then about 6 or 7 years ago, Janet Self of Flockworks, she and I teamed up and did an upwelling, was what we called it. And we connected up the arts with the issue of plastics. And we did several floats in the 4th of July parade. And we did some community events, trash fashion show, and all that. So it was this book, A Toxic Love Story, that I read that kind of got me beginning to think about plastics. And then a couple of years ago, I helped write a grant that Sheila, our executive director, kind of added her amazing magic to make it grantable through the California Coastal Commission. Whale tail grants, for those of you that have whale tail license plate, when you pay extra for that, money goes into a pool and then it gets granted out to different programs. So it funded me going into the schools with Michael Brito and talking to kids about the issue of plastics in the ocean. Next slide, please. So Talking Trash again, we started our program, we piloted it at Three Rivers Charter School, and we reached about 500 school kids in the course of the school year. You can go to the next slide. We went to Three Rivers first, then we went to Fort Bragg High School, Fort Bragg Middle School, Danny Gray fifth graders, Mendocino High School. And my big vision was to have the high school science kids teach the eighth graders what they learned, and then have the eighth graders teach the fifth graders. But with our school system, different periods, busing issues, that wasn't quite doable. Three Rivers, we were able to elicit the help of the seventh and eighth graders to help lead some of the activities. So it was quite a powerful event of reaching that many kids over the course of a school year. And we came up with very interactive lessons and addressed everything from sifting sand in search for microplastics and microfibers with the high schoolers, to testing out the density of different types of plastic and dropping them into water to see where they land in the water column. So then we could have that discussion of what animal is going to be affected by the plastic that floats, what animal is going to be affected by the plastic that sinks. So you can go to the next slide, please. And each class, we started out with what's called a brand trash audit. So may every single kid get in touch with their trash from school. So it was quite disgusting, pretty stinky, laid out on a tarp. And they were then kept on, we had data sheets. And so the goal was to sort the different plastic items into the different numbers, and then pay attention to the brands, because there's an organization, Break Free from Plastics, that keeps track of who the top corporations are that are contributing the most plastic around the globe. So then it also made our young people aware of which items are getting thrown away, which, what are the common disposable single-use plastic that they were seeing in the trash. Next slide, please. So as you can see here, we had it laid out. Thankfully, we had decent weather and we were able to be outside for most of the time. And even though the kids moaned and groaned, in our feedback at the end, did a pre-survey and a post-survey. Across the board, that was one of the most memorable things that the kids really enjoyed, even though they thought it was disgusting. And I couldn't bring myself to using disposable gloves, because I was like, oh my gosh, 500 pairs of disposable gloves in the trash. So we had dish gloves that Michael and I cleaned and washed and dried out each time after each audit. So talk about dedication. So, and then we, for our World Ocean Day last June, Michael compiled all of the statistics from each of those surveys and all those schools. So it's not so much that you need to see all the details, but you can see in this first graph here, Slim Jims. That was the top one that we had a lot of. So what I've noticed in the years of working in the schools is our schools are now feeding children because of low income issues. So there's a lot of donations from the food bank and donations in the community. So depending upon what those donations are, that's the most plastic that we would find. So obviously Slim Jim was a big popular item. Next slide, please. These are some of the common ones that were the top culprits. And the next one, thank you. And then this one here, again, don't need to see all the teeny tiny lines, but if you've ever noticed on the bottom of plastic items, there tends to be the chasing arrow with a different number in there. And so the higher the number, the less likely it gets recycled, because it's a bit of more of a chemical cocktail. So the unknown is the biggest part, and most likely that is food wrappers and single-use items that don't have aren't recyclable, and they don't have a number on their item, on their product, excuse me. Next slide, thank you. This one again, the number 7s, half of it was that. Number 1 is probably the most common ones that we come across. Those are our drinking water bottles and soda bottles. Number 5s are things like salsa containers and to-go cups, things like that. And then next slide, please. This one was the most alarming and not surprising at all, but food packaging. At most of the beach cleanups nowadays, it's the cigarette butts, but I'm sad to say that food packaging is nipping at the heels of cigarette butts of what is found as common items. Next slide, please. Thank you. So how did we get here? We didn't get here overnight. It's been a work in progress. The initial plastic was created to actually be of help environmentally, because back in the day, billiard balls were, they used elephant tusks to make billiard balls. So some of the very first plastic was created to substitute that and make a different, use a different material to substitute that depletion of an animal and ecosystem. And most of the plastics has been mass produced in the last 10 years. And so it's one of these things that's just been gradual, kind of happening as a backdrop as we all continue to live our lives. And especially since COVID hit, it's been quite a huge increase. And we all know that we are dependent upon our fossil fuels to get around in our cars. So you can go to the next slide. And what's happened is the fossil fuel industry is noticing as we get smarter in our options, and we're making more choices of energy efficient transportation and things like that. So therefore they are, next slide, going, plastic, cheap to make. Let's make more plastic. So they get subsidies and tax breaks, and they continue to take home more profit than most people realize. And now their big focus is expanding upon making more plastic factories. Next slide, please. In the next 3 to 4 years, it's mind-blowing how much they want to expand their facilities. Exxon, I don't know if it's happened or not. I know there was talk of a 1,500-acre facility built in Texas. And it's no surprise that there's a social injustice part to this narrative, because a lot of these factories are in places of socioeconomically deprived areas and people of color. Most of us have probably heard of Cancer Alley in Louisiana and Texas and so on and so forth. I was listened to a webinar recently where there's the people themselves, and then what's not being talked about is that a lot of these factories are being built on indigenous people's lands of their burial grounds of Native Americans and African slaves. So it's a pretty intense, push forward to try to expand more, because they've gotten us all to think that we need more plastic and need new plastic. Next slide, please. So not only have we been probably the lead in the plastic production as far as the United States goes, but then all of a sudden we started shipping it around the globe. So places like Indonesia and gorgeous island areas that used to have banana leaves and their own way of selling their items to tourists, now have had these big corporations move in and force their items into these smaller communities. And then this is a fabulous short video that can tell you far more than I can, and hopefully it comes through okay. And if it doesn't, I can let you know how to see it on your own. Bear with us.
Let's see, I'm going to share it here. Just make sure I click on the right screen. All right.
You've probably heard about a giant trash island in the ocean, or that poor sea turtle and the straw. Maybe you've even heard how plastic is being found inside the fish we eat. The plastic crisis gets a lot of attention, but the headlines usually focus on the plastic that ends up in the environment. And that's just part of the story. The truth is, plastic has a whole life cycle that's hidden from view, one that harms people and the planet from start to finish. Let's start at the beginning. Plastic is made from fossil fuels like oil or fracked natural gas. Extracting those fossil fuels and turning them into plastics creates a lot of pollution. Pollution that most often affects marginalized communities nearby. As we've gotten better about using less oil and gas to power our lives, the fossil fuel industry found a lifeline in plastics. In fact, oil and gas companies are doubling down on plastic production, with plans to build or expand over 300 petrochemical plants in the US alone by 2025. But these companies already produce more plastic than we can use. So where's all that plastic going? A lot of it's flowing into new markets, in places like Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Because more than any other product category, plastic isn't driven by the demand for it, but by the supply. Corporations like Unilever, Nestle, and Procter & Gamble are aggressively marketing single-use plastic products around the world. These companies go to places like Indonesia, where I live, and push their products onto communities that just aren't prepared to deal with all that plastic. Maybe they're used to using natural packaging. Maybe they live on a tiny island without a system of waste collection. And on top of that, countries in the global north are shipping their own plastic waste into these countries too. When you add that all up, it's no wonder so much of this plastic ends up in the environment. And globally, that's where a whopping 32% of plastic packaging ends up. 40% goes to a landfill, where plastic just piles up for future generations to deal with. And 14% is incinerated. Incineration is a nasty business, producing toxic smoke and fly ash. These super expensive facilities depend on plastic to burn everything else. It is oil and gas after all. So they want to see more plastic, not less. Then there's recycling. Unfortunately, it's not the solution that many people think it is. Just 14% of plastic packaging gets recycled, and only 2% is effectively recycled, meaning it becomes something as useful as before. The rest is downcycled into something worse. And most recycled plastic is only recycled once before ending up in landfills, incinerators, or the environment anyway. So it turns out that we can't burn, bury, or recycle our way out of this problem. And we can't just scoop all that plastic out of the environment either. That's like trying to bail out a bathtub with a teaspoon while the tap is on full blast. So how about we turn off the tap by shutting down the plastic machine? That means passing policies that create systemic change, like phasing out the single-use plastics that pollute the most, ending the fossil fuel subsidies that are fueling big plastic, and holding companies responsible for the plastic waste they create. That's how we can achieve our vision of a zero-waste future, where all of our products and packaging can be reused or repaired, effectively recycled or composted, and ultimately how we create a sustainable, circular economy that works for both people and the planet. Visit storyofplastic.org to learn more and take action.
Thanks, Michael, for queuing that up. So that was a video that we ended up showing the high school students because we felt it was important for them to really get the whole full circle. And I feel like it really sums it up quite clearly, for sure. And so this part of the talk is, of course, not, there's nothing really positive about it when you start going down the rabbit hole that I've started going down. But before I speak to this one in particular, I wanted to say that I recently learned that what's happening is because the fossil fuel industry is aware of the fact that more people are waking up to this issue and wanting it to get a handle on it, that they're doing things like creating organizations, like there's an Alliance to End Plastic Waste. And so who formed it but Procter & Gamble and PepsiCo. And so it's not only do we have to worry about the production of them, but they're appearing to be on the end of solving the problem. And they're all shifting their tune to wanting to put it to the recycling note, which again puts it back on us. And last time I checked is sometimes you go to the store and there's no option but to buy something in plastic. So I just wanted to point that out, that even though they claim they're trying to be of help, that they disguise themselves behind, an organization like To End Plastic Waste, when they're the ones that are producing the most of it. And then what's also sneaky about it is they're proposing this idea of plastic credits, similar to carbon credits. So they can make themselves look better, claiming that they're going to recycle and then be able to use plastic credits to, beef up their production in their own way. So this is an image that I really like because it speaks to how it all kind of happens. We have our, like I said, there's the vital use for plastic, and then there's this increase over the last, especially in the last, since COVID, the last 3 to 4 years, that so many things are now in plastic. So it starts out as macro on land, and then it breaks down. And between the sun exposure and waves, if it ends up in the ocean, and rain, it breaks down into microplastics. And then the issue with that being that, of course, it affects our wildlife more than we even want to go and touch as far as being made aware of, but it does tremendously, and especially our ocean, considering all of it and up in the ocean. So next slide, please. So this is a story that I'm going to remind some of us of, because we might have forgotten about it, or maybe even didn't hear about it, but talk about an impact in the environment. This past February, 2023, there was a huge train derailment in a place called East Palestine, Ohio. 300,000 gallons of vinyl chloride, which is essentially the chemical that is used in PVC pipes and children's toys and all kinds of stuff. It tipped over and pretty much inundated the town of East Palestine. The people were evacuated because it was such a severe environmental issue. And for some reason, they were told that the EPA had ordered that it should have a control burn. And to get rid of it, they lit it on fire. And you can see in the image here and in the next slide that it produced a toxic plume, like a nuclear explosion. And the people were told that they could return back to their town 3 days later, and that it was all cleaned up. And here it is now, November 2023, and they're still waiting for President Biden to call it a state of emergency there. The people are getting sick. There's severe liver cancer issues that is tied to vinyl chloride. And you may remember back in the 70s when we got tuned into aerosol sprays being a problem. That was the first banning of vinyl chloride, but now it's still used in other items. So East Palestine community, there's a new documentary out that's educating people about it, and they are doing their best to get the attention they need to be able to clean up their community. And this is just one of a couple of different ones that have happened in the past couple of years. So we've got all these different fronts that this is happening on. We've got the new facilities being proposed to be built, and then we have old railways that are transporting these chemicals as you and I are doing our day-to-day life. And unless I went down this rabbit hole of making myself aware, I wouldn't have known to think about it. But I do remember when this happened, and then just realized that, oh, interesting, we haven't heard too much about it since then. And so that the families and the community from there, along with, I forget the town in Pennsylvania that had a similar spill, are, they're gathering together to really work on a ban for vinyl chloride and present that to the EPA, because I think there's a big meeting next month about that. And the big thing I'd like to stress, and I'll explain it in one of the organizations later in the slide, is that it's important for us to sign that petition, because if the EPA gets it on their radar and bans it now, it takes anywhere from 5 to 6 years to begin the process of actually making it, get completely eliminated as a one of the chemicals used in plastics. So we shouldn't delay on any of this stuff because it's an issue to begin with. It's going to be here, long beyond all of us. So that's why I'm bringing it to our awareness that we can be proactive in our politics around this growing issue. Next slide. So what we talked about with the kids was, okay, so how does it end up where it ends up? So this is a beautiful image that my coworker Michael found. Reminds us that watersheds start as high up as in the mountains, and regardless of where the trash begins, waterways will help bring it down to the ocean. Rain, wind, it floats down into the ocean. And it's something like 80% of the plastic trash that ends up in the ocean ends up through rivers that bring it into the ocean. So I just wanted to tie the connection of land to sea. Next slide, please. And then, of course, I would hope that we've all have some connection and awareness around the gyres that are around the globe. The North Pacific Gyre off of our coast here has the Pacific garbage patch, the largest collection of plastic in the ocean. I think it's up to twice the size of Texas. And so we talked to the kids about that, and the fact that when they call it an island, it's a little bit deceiving because it makes us think that it's kind of this solid, clustering of plastic, and it's more like a plastic soup. So there is, chunks of big plastic that are there, but it's breaking down between the wind and the sun, and the wave action is breaking it down. And so that's, affecting all the critters in the ocean, from the zooplankton on up the chain. Next slide, please. So where do microplastics come from? Like I said, they start out as macro, start out as big products on land, and through all the different things that we've mentioned, they end up being broken down. But the reason I picked this slide is because one of the ones that is not quite in the public as much, we're hearing more about microplastics as this topic becomes more on the global awareness, but microfibers are a big issue. And back in the 70s, some of us on the Zoom call know about the polyester of the 70s and the wide collars and all that. Now it's athletic wear and fleece. And I love my fleece, and I love my Noyo hoodie, and yoga wear. And so there's the issue of in our washing machines and the fibers washing down the drain, and then the wastewater treatment plant can only capture so much. So there's talk of more of, washing machines, the newer ones getting made with the filters on them. Some other options are buying, they make laundry bags that you can put your fleece and your poly items in, that'll capture some of the fibers so they don't go into the water. So just wanted to put out the idea of microfibers, because it's something that's not as on the forefront in the discussion just yet. Next slide, please. So how does this affect our environment? The classic bioaccumulation. If our zooplankton are having evidence of microplastics and microfibers, then our little schooling fish eat that, and then the bigger fish eats that, and then the bigger fish eats that, and so on and so forth. And those of us that enjoy our fish, it impacts us. And what's not being ingested by the animals could affect through entanglements. Sarah definitely can speak to that in her work that she does. And the Marine Mammal Center, as far as when rescued animals that have entanglements that are able to be rescued. That's when you hear about the shorebirds that we find on the beach with plastics in their belly. That's, this is the heartbreaking part of it, is just how it impacts our animals. It's just, it's beyond what my heart can handle at times. But again, important for us to think it all through. Next slide, please. Oops, back up there. Oops, wait. Back it up to the one with the whales, please. One more. There you go. So interestingly enough, hang on, give me a second because I have some notes on this. My buddy, Jeff Jacobson, our science advisor from the Noyo Center, shared a paper with me recently, scientific paper, that has explored how this is affecting the baleen whales, because different than the toothed whales and our toothed animals, the baleen whales take in mouthfuls of water with the krill and the different smaller critters that they eat in that, and filter it out to catch it. And so the paper that came out in June discussed how it's impacting the gray whales in particular, because as you can see in this image, the gray whales are the one whale that is a bottom feeder, and they go along the substrate and do suck in the sandy, muddy bottom for that krill. And so they found in the zooplankton that this scientific paper studied that through the food web, there's a significant concern because of the gray whales and their unique lineage of being a baleen whale that suction feed instead of lunge feeding. And so the gray whales frequently ingest benthic substrate. That's the bottom, of the ocean floor. And they found microplastics present in all 26 zooplankton samples that they analyzed. And that a total of 418 suspected microplastics were identified from those 26 zooplanktons. So, and 50% of it was microfibers. So it's even impacting our whales and our zooplankton. So that's, again, it's really hard to hear that. And there's not, I don't know that this paper was saying there was a direct correlation, but in the last few years, our gray whales have been having unusual mortality events off and on in the last couple of years. So whether they're not getting the nutrition they need because of the fact that the zooplankton they're eating have the fibers in them, or if the nursing moms are passing it on, that's definitely of a concern. So again, thinking about our precious food web and how all of this is impacting that in addition to us humans on land. So take a deep breath after that one. Oh, blessed animals. So that's a lot to take in. So thank you for bearing with me. I just wanted to at least share the environmental impacts a little bit more in my talk this year. So like I mentioned earlier, can't recycle our way out of it. It's too late for that. We can make our own individual changes, whether you be like me. I buy toothpaste pills in a little tin container. I bring my own plastic baggies to the store. I have a moral dilemma and spend way too long shopping half the time because I can't bring myself to buy an item in plastic. When I was in the East Coast getting detergent for my mom a couple of years back, I was appalled over the fact that there wasn't any laundry detergent that wasn't in a plastic jug. So aside from that, what's going on in California? California, thankfully, is up there in the states that's working on legislation that's trying to tackle some of these major issues around plastics. And next slide, please. So we've had a few bills that have already been voted in years back. Bill number 1884, which was supposed to limit restaurants providing straws only on request. Bill number 270, which was supposed to prohibit distributing reusable bags unless they fit certain requirements. Whether those are getting carried out to the degree they should be or not, that's to be determined. But recently we had Senate Bill number 54. And the key on this is that it's going to take a while for it to get put into action. So that's where the legislation is key, that we get it in place now, because it takes a little bit to set it up, as you can imagine. So by 2032, this bill will have it be that plastic producers must reduce the amount of plastic in the packaging that they make by 25%. And that all single-use packaging, including paper and metals, has to be recyclable or compostable. So that was signed a year ago in June. And so that's a pretty big one that's on the plate. And so there was one of the women in the article that I read said, we did something that the world thought was impossible. There's no such thing as a perfect policy, but she thinks this bill still goes farther than any plastic policy we've seen. So another bill that's on board is an Assembly Bill 793. And Governor Newsom signed into law that bill in 2020. And that is supposed to establish recycled content standards for plastic beverage containers. So essentially a refund value so that people will return the bottles so that they get recycled and get money on them, because it's amazing to me that we're one of the biggest states in the United States and we don't get a lot of CRV back on our plastics. So this bill will help improve the market for recycled plastic by increasing the demand, thus increasing the scrap value of the material for recycling centers, and increasing people getting it, in to be recycled. So it will help a little bit on that factor, the fact that we all do our part and we recycle it, and it's hard to know how far it goes. The most popular of the recycled items are the lower the number, the better. So number ones, number twos, and number fives are among all the plastics are the most common, that if they get recycled, those are the ones that people want to take off the hands of the place in Willits and actually recycle them and turn them into other items. So let me see if there's anything else on that. I think that's it. And then what's happening in Washington, this is pretty big. Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. Thank you, Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon, and Jared Huffman for backing, and 130 co-sponsors and more than 200 organizations this act. It was first introduced in 2020 and got reintroduced in 2021. And it's again an important one. It's comprehensive and addressing this issue. First one in the nation's history. So again, we need to pay attention on this and continue to support these bills when we're aware of them. I will share an organization a little bit that's created a database where you can plug in your state and find out what bills are being considered and kind of get caught up on a legislative level if there's those of you that are motivated on that note. Next slide, please. So some questions come to mind for me, at least when I was doing all this, was, okay, How about the US state and federal policymakers and agencies? How are they working to address their own plastic solution? So, you know, how do we keep these? Oh, excuse me. Forgive me. I lost my page here. 1 second. Bear with me. Hold on. Yeah. Okay. Back here. Good. Okay. So the first question that I had there, as far as what are the federal policy makers doing? So there's an encouraging recent moves by the United States and federal policymakers to make some real solutions. In September of this year, Massachusetts became the first state to ban the purchase of single-use plastic bottles under 21 fluid ounces. So that's one state that's trying to move in that direction. Flip the script on plastics. This is really amazing. I learned about this. It's an initiative to help the entertainment industry to model real solutions to the plastic pollution crisis, so that we don't reinforce all these, you know, instant single-use and throwaway thing in our movies and in our, you know, shows that we watch, and we start having different modeling going in that respect. And then how can corporations and industries be held accountable for this? Plastic production is the cause of the pollution. The industries produce and sell the plastic. And so it's up to producer responsibility. That's one direction we could work on, is making the people that produce it, like in Maine and Oregon, they're making plastic producers legally and financially responsible for taking action to limit the environmental and environmental causes of the plastic. So again, it's action is the best we can do with all that. Moving on to the next slide, please. Thank you. And then broadening the lens, pulling back into this global piece. Interestingly enough, right now in Africa, it is the, what is it called? Let me see, the INC3. It's the third session of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, and they're meeting about plastic pollution. And it's the first time that a global plastic treaty is being looked at by the countries around the world. And they're trying to work together, value the input from stakeholders. Because the US makes a bulk of the plastic used globally, we're definitely needing to make the most change. There's something like 30,000 chemicals that are used to make plastic, 3,000 of which are concerned. So this plastic treaty is trying to address the concern of those particular chemicals. Russia and China have argued that production cuts don't belong in the global public treaty, which is mind-blowing to me. And Saudi Arabia wants to limit the supply of plastics because it would risk their economic growth and stability. So also at the table at this conference are the fossil fuel companies, and they're trying to toot the recycle, you know, we just need to recycle our way out of it. So I'm at least hopeful and grateful that this is becoming a global topic, and that there's plenty of different countries that are concerned, and different organizations within those countries that are at the table right now this week, meeting to discuss how we begin to turn the tide and start to turn the tap off on this, you know, runaway tap of production. So I just thought it was pretty timely that this is going on as my talk, as I'm doing my talk here. So I hope that there's a lot of good movement forward, and at least some goal setting of how we can collectively as a globe start to make some changes so we can save our precious planet and the impact that this plastic is having on it. Next slide, please. So here we go to the inspirational time, the part that matters to me with sharing all that I just shared with you. So this is one of my most inspired organizations, mostly because the CEO of this company, I discovered him probably like 6 or 7 years ago. Slayton Boyle, I think is his name. He had done a TED talk about being a diver, an 18-year-old diver, and being appalled at finding plastic floating in the beautiful areas that he dove. So he came up with an idea back then of creating docks shaped like manta rays, so like having those mandibles, and putting the docks where the gyres are. So using the natural flow of the currents to collect the plastics in these areas. And then even thought it through to use centrifuge to separate out the plastics from the plankton, and then take the plastics and bring it back to land and, reproduce it, recycle it, repurpose it. So they are busy, actively, continually reinventing themselves out in the ocean. And they are amazing in that they take these huge nets between their boats and they collect up the plastic, and the nets don't go very low, so it doesn't capture the animals. And they've even updated their netting so that if an animal does get caught, they have a way to release it. And then they bring the plastic onto the boat, they sort it, and then he even modeled making sunglasses using the plastic that was collected out of the ocean to just show people how there's a whole industry behind taking ocean plastic and turning it into new product without having to make new plastic. He doesn't want to reproduce and make things like that. He just wanted to use that as an example. So now he's in his 20s, and his TED Talk of, in his teens went viral. He might have thought he was going to go do something else, and here he came up with the ocean cleanup. So they're an incredible organization. I highly recommend Googling them and seeing what they're up to. They're going up the major rivers around the globe, and they have boats that have conveyor belts that collect the plastic up on the boats. So they're tackling it on multiple levels, and it's their goal to collect 90% of the plastic, to 100% of it out of the ocean. So I just wanted to give props to Ocean Cleanup. And then Plastic Pollution Coalition. These guys are a nonprofit, and they're a communication and advocacy organization. And they collaborate with global alliance organizations, businesses, and individuals to create a more just, equitable, regenerative world free of plastic pollution and toxic impacts. So what I appreciate about them is they are trying to work with the different communities that are impacted, the low income and people of color, and helping them, find their way through so that they can reclaim some of their land and prevent some of the health issues from happening to their communities as they move forward. They're into delivering products using non-toxic, refillable, and reusable systems, and they're into regulations and legislation to support a circular economy. So giving props to the Plastic Pollution Coalition. Some of their, let's see, does it say what their products? Oh yeah, they're the organization that came together with the Flip the Script idea. They've got some other great ideas going as well. Moving on to Break Free from Plastics. Oh, I just can't bow enough to this organization. The woman that's the director of this organization, I believe, used to work for the EPA, so she's very knowledgeable in working with governments and legislation and all that. So what's amazing about them is since they launched in 2016, more than 12,000 organizations and individual supporters from across the world have joined them, demanding massive reductions in single-use plastic and to push for lasting solutions to the crisis. They fight petrochemicals, they push for corporate accountability, they promote systemic solutions, they're into building zero waste communities, and what drives their actions is shifting the narrative, changing the policies, and movement building. So they're the ones that we got the idea of doing the brand trash audit from. And next slide, you'll see they just did their 5-year report from global trash audits around the globe. And these are the top culprits. Coca-Cola has been the top one for 5 years in a row. PepsiCo, Nestle, Unilever, and Mondelez. So I appreciate them because they are really keeping the spotlight on the corporations. And they were even encouraging people that do these audits to take the plastic and ship it back to the corporation and make them to make the message of like, you deal with your plastic. So give thanks to the Break Free from Plastic folks. And then next one, please. Beyond Plastics, their mission is to end plastic pollution everywhere. They launched in 2019, and they're a nationwide project based out of Bennington, Vermont. And they pair their wisdom and experience of environmental policy experts with the energy and creativity of grassroots advocation. And they're making an effective movement to end plastic pollution. They use deep policy and advocacy expertise to inform and get people motivated towards making change. And they're committed to environmental justice, which I really appreciate. So remember, we got to think globally, but we can act locally. So working together, we can support organizations like Noyo Center, where we're doing our best to, right now, myself and Trey and Kranz and Michael Brito, before he left, we are working on a plastics exhibit that will eventually get put on display here at Discovery Center. Sarah's work that she does, the beach survey responses, the marine mammal stranding led by Sarah, I said, the science talks, the talking trash education in the schools, that's what Noyo Center does. I would like to get moving in the direction of approaching our city council and starting to look at ways that we can begin to lessen our plastics here on the coast. Wouldn't it be great if we could become plastic free, or like make not only be the place people want to come because of the beauty here, but to not only come here, but then come and get different options when it comes to go items, not all in plastic and disposable single use. So I just want to inspire us. If any of you are motivated, let's, act locally. So, and then next slide. Noyo's efforts I mentioned, where we do our cleanups, we do our surveys down at our field station, formerly known as the Slack Tie Cafe. We have a bunch of different science, marine science that we're working on, urchinomics to help with the kelp forest collapse, abalone brooding, seaweed tumbling. So we're doing our best with our small team and our, the best we can keep our little engine going. And then there's other organizations in the community, Grassroots Institute, all kinds of stuff. So that's kind of the efforts that we got going locally. And then last but not least, the key takeaways is, by no means am I wanting anybody to go away feeling like I'm putting any blame or responsibility on you. My big thing is, whatever we can each do individually, do it. Try one thing, start there. And then when you get the one thing down, go for number two. And then just keep on going. And before too long, all those little efforts make a difference. Refusing, like we talk about reduce, reuse, recycle, refuse, just refuse. Don't take the plastic. Bring in your own plate, bring in your own jar, bring in your own plastic bags. Start getting people more aware of that option. Know that their awareness around this growing issue is more than it's ever been, and we know how to stop it. And the solution to this crisis is simple, and we can help advance it. From Beyond Plastics, their thing is, the tide may be full of plastic, but the wind is at our backs. Over 80% of people worldwide support the regulation and reduction of single-use plastic. We have the power to cut through the smog of plastic pollution at sea, on land, and in our air and bodies by learning how to speak out effectively and demand change. No plastic collecting ocean trawler can do this, but we can. And they've got trainings going on at Beyond Plastics in December in case you want to see what's up with that. Pay attention legislatively, get involved locally, support the organizations like ours and the other ones that you find important, and remember that knowledge is power, and that's how we begin to make those changes happen. So thank you. I know that was a lot to take in, and I welcome any comments and any questions, and I appreciate everybody's being willingness to receive all this information. So it was quite an experience to put it together and think about how best to share it. So I've been babbling a lot. So I hope that people feel a little bit more informed, and it's, that fine line it is a lot, but I do believe that we can each, take our stride, pick our thing that we want to do, and lead by example and make the changes happen. So.
Excellent, Sue. Thank you for taking that on and digging so deeply into it. And I know darn well it hurts your heart. And, focusing on what plastic and recycling is actually meaning with the youth is an incredible target. It's a lot for them to carry as well. But hopefully, our whole thing about them bringing that knowledge home and helping to to share that. I had one of our new interns who's a senior in high school say, I'm working at the hospital and I'm appalled at how much stuff is getting thrown away every time a person moves through a room. And I hadn't thought about that. And that came directly from a senior in high school who is one of those kids that all of this knowledge has seriously affected, and she's thinking that through. So getting our youth to continue to talk about it. But really, come on, folks. It's not on the youth. We can't make them feel guilty about their plastic water bottle. It's so much bigger, as you addressed in your talk. There were a couple of comments here. There was some curiosity about recycling our CRVs here on the coast. And I think through some legislation, they are making it actually the law that we have to have recycling possibilities for CRVs here on the coast. And so I believe you can, they're starting to, because we pay for it, we pay that extra. So I believe that they're now making available some places where you can take your CRV recyclables.
I'm feeling like that. I'm not 100% sure, but I feel like the food bank might be doing something once a week, if I'm not mistaken around that. I could be wrong about that. I'm not really sure. Let me see what else see here.
Do you want to
Okay.
read those? Go ahead.
So, Sky here, and I just want to say that Kat Roos, who works at the Albion dump, let us know that recently they're starting to do CRV.
Excellent.
And yeah, and that's a really great thing because people are bringing it in.
Great.
That's just another one of those steps that it takes.
Yeah, it's a tiny thing, but it's good to know.
Yes.
So keep your recycling, and even those one-use plastic drink bottles, it'll get you a nickel or whatever it gets you. So yeah, and keep the cap on.
Susan,
Yeah,
I see your hand
go
up.
ahead. Sue, do you want me to handle your chat, or do you want to take either way? You
You can
go
handle
ahead.
it. I just saw Susan had her hand up. So
Yeah, go ahead, Susan.
Could you put on the chat room the things you just mentioned, the things that we should be thinking about and doing just before we open up for discussion?
yes, most definitely. Give you a moment.
Great, thank you, Sue. Then if you want to write some of those down, or you can always watch this talk later, but it's great to start thinking broadly and finding those things that you can do. I think that's inspiring that you're looking at, what can we do? Noor Dawood, who works with youth over in Anderson Valley, says thank you so much for bringing this up. Wonderful, important talk. Can you please give us guidance on specific high impact action we can take to advocate for policy change in this realm? Great one, Noor. How can we biggest action, that summit that's going on in Africa right now is pretty, that just puts to light how evil and how hard we have to fight. Like Sue was talking about, the recycling, great, do it. Clean up your beaches, do all the things that we're already doing. But beyond that, this policy stuff we've got to get out there and yell and scream about the policy with the petroleum companies now looking into evil and wolf in sheep clothing ways to get around using the petroleum products to make more plastic. Like, that's just backwards. And yeah, let's see if we can get through some of these questions. I didn't bring my glasses into the room, so if any of you have a question, you're welcome to raise your hand and ask it yourself. I feel like reading this. Go ahead and chime in. Thank you, everybody.
Sarah, I can read a couple of them if that'll help you.
Either will. Thank you, Michael.
Dobie had a comment just saying that she wrote an article in the Pinniped Press a couple months ago about companies that are making plastic from kelp and other seaweeds, including packaging, bags, food containers. So the Pinniped Press is a volunteer run monthly newsletter that we send out. So if you're not on our newsletter list, on our email list, make sure you're on that. That group does a really great job about getting information out there from everything from plastics to marine life, marine mammal topics. Kelly G, thank you, Sue. We no longer get a bag at checkout, but everything, even the lettuce in the store, is in plastic. It seems backwards. Susan, her question about putting everything in there. Steve, have you learned about any alternatives to plastics for packaging? Of course, paper, but someone recently suggested kelp could be used in alternative packaging materials.
Yeah, so that's another thing that's a little tricky with some of the alternatives because they're like compostable plastics. There's like a couple different angles. From my understanding, some level of the compostable plastics need to go to a facility that's large enough to turn them into compost. And then there's some compostable plastics that will break down in your compost pile, and it actually says that on the container. So there's, it's one of those things that my thing is I try to either bring my own thing to take my stuff away in, or I try to support the businesses that do have some of those other options. But there is the issue of the fact that some of the green plastics, the eco plastics, need a facility that can actually break them down as quickly as they need to be versus like throwing them in your compost pile. So again, it's like, it's better than, going for one of the numbered plastics, but that's where I'd love to go and see if we could get, my thought is if we approach the city council, there's a great film that I want to show in the community called Microplastics Madness. And it's about fifth graders in New York City that got their schools to quit serving their lunches on styrofoam trays. And so at first they were, the higher ups were like, it's too expensive for us to do an alternative. But then they decided to team together with other schools across the United States. So then they had a bigger buying power, brought down the cost of their product, and then could pay less for the product. So my thought is, wouldn't it be great? And I don't know how simple it would be, but we buy some of the to-go products on a big level, and then the restaurants buy them from the city council, and then we just try to shift some, I don't know. It's just, I'm at that point where I'm like, I'll do anything. You know what I mean? So, like to get creative with that. Steve, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. I think instead of fighting an economic hurdle, a huge wall to get over, if these alternatives come along, and I think your idea is a great one, if there's enough buying capacity to kind of seed the market, or maybe governments could even subsidize a little bit, but get people in the habit of exploring these other options, and then the cost will come down, and then that hurdle may not be so high.
Yeah,
I mean, I feel like we all feel horrible about plastic, and yet we use it because we don't know what else to use. But if there was sort of scalable alternatives, I think it would be really important.
Definitely.
So somebody's out there and entrepreneurial and wants to work on a project.
Yeah, well, that's what I said to the kids in the school. I'm like, if you've got a business mind and you get creative, like create the facility that does the composting of the bio plastics, or create the facility in Mendocino County so we could manage, our stuff here in the county instead of shipping it to wherever it ends up. I found out that our recycling from our local curbside goes over to Willits, and then it either sits at Willits until a buyer wants to take it from there. And then I found that our garbage goes as far away as Potrero Hill at times from the curbside. So, you just start unwinding these things. You're like, oh, interesting. Okay. So, so I'm feeling very motivated to try to, start to begin on a local governmental level as we wait for the bigger policies to take their, they just take stages, it seems to be. And I'm going to work on putting together a page on our website that's about plastics and some other options and things like that, just so people have resources there. But what I can say of a big political move to do is to go to Break Free from Plastics. I'll put it in the chat, and sign the petition to ban the vinyl chloride. If we could start there, that would be awesome, because then we won't be having that toxic liquid being transported on our old railways and spilling in other communities around the United States. And it's kind of ironic to me that that our pipes and our children's toys are made with vinyl chloride. There's just something kind of like, oh my gosh, ah, and we didn't always have all the plastic that we have. And it's a really good resource, but we're wasting it as a resource. And we're just making too much virgin plastic. We need to stop on making new plastic, just bottom line. So when you put that
Peggy Martin put a comment in the chat about that she read an article recently that says that the boomers are more responsive, more responsible than the Gen Z and Gen X in terms of recycling, which is surprising. And I'll never forget when I talked to a college student about recycling. He's like, I'm trying to survive. I can't think about recycling my plastic or buying biodegradable dishwashing detergent containers or whatever. So it's like,
that's the thing. It's got to be more manageable for everybody. It's definitely an economic privilege to be able to make different choices for plastic. And we try to make that known to the children as well. It's just like, we get that maybe your family can't afford to make these choices, but we just want you to know that this is what's going on. And I had one little kid that was like, I know what I'm doing this summer. I'm picking up the trash in my neighborhood so it doesn't end up in the ocean. I was like, okay, good. If you're inspired to do that, go do it. So it's kind of like Sheila felt about with the kelp forest. She just didn't want people 5 years down the road going, why didn't anybody talk about this? So that's what I said to the kids. I was like, I don't want you to end up in college going, why didn't anybody talk to me about plastics? So.
Dobby, thank you. Dobby actually put up here on our chat that there is recycling option on Sundays at the K-8 school, and some other possibilities for the CRV recycling. CRV recycling, Mendocino K-8 school on Sundays, 8:30 to 5:30. Casper Community Center, Mondays, 8:30 to 5:30. You can have them write the check directly to Noyo Center, and instead of taking the cash. So you can go and get your recycling done, your CRV done, and then donate it to a nonprofit if you like. Thanks for pointing that out. That's great, Dobby.
You need to separate the cans and the bottles and the plastic bottles.
Got it. So a little bit,
but you need to have them separated.
okay, wonderful. Thank you. That's great. That's new. That is good news for our county, for our community, because it's been on away for so many years. That's
Actually,
great.
they started it in May. It's been going on since May. They
Great.
just haven't publicized
Takes
it enough.
many ears and eyes to know about these things for sure.
Exactly.
I want to put a shout out to both Harvest and Corners because they both offer bulk items. So I go there and I get my shampoo filled up in my reusable container. I go there to get my grains. So there's all different, ways that we can make the change happen slowly but surely. That's for
Someone
sure.
also brought up cellophane being made from cellulose, and that is good. I suppose you just have to look carefully, make sure that cellophane is, I mean, is that across the board? I always use my used plastic bags instead of cellophane. I never buy it. I use if I have to buy something in plastic, it has about 4 more lives with me. And instead of cellophane or tinfoil over leftovers, I'll just put it in a washed out berry bag or whatever.
There you go. There is a great show on Netflix. I'm forgetting it at this moment that I'm forgetting it. Anyways, they showcased one of the shows in Australia, and there's actually a couple that's working on a plant-based cellophane wrap, because that's like, a common item in restaurants and all kinds of things. So different people are coming up with all these different alternatives, because polymers were originally just they're natural in nature. It's just taken intelligent minds to go, oh, let's put this one in and this one together. And oh, wow, it makes this, and throw this one in, it hardens. And what I did learn about the vinyl chloride, an alternative for the piping is to use stainless steel or recycled copper. So we could move in that direction as we, try to move away from using the vinyl chloride. and other ones. So I'm grateful for the global treaty because it is bringing the topic of, you know, of all the gazillion chemicals to really look at the ones that are really like of a high alarm and start looking at weeding those out of being used in a regular way.
I would love to see our beach surveyor crew who surveys beaches from Elk all the way up to Westport have removed. We will probably have this number fairly soon as our college student computer science intern is going to put out how much trash our beach survey team has removed from our beaches. It's incredible. It's a big number. It's a huge number. And I look forward to Misha giving us that number of how much trash we've removed. And I think we notice it because our community really does. Our people get out there, different groups get out there, kids get out there, everybody gets out there and cleans up trash. And you walk on our beaches and they are actually sort of clean. You see people in Fort Bragg picking up stuff before it goes on the storm drains, people along the highway. So support those people, become those people, do it. It just, if nothing else, it feels good to get out there and be a part of that.
Appreciate everybody's support. And like I said, it's not a super fun topic to have to bring up, but it's in our world and we can only ignore it for so long or, you know, be so overwhelmed that we can't, you know, take it in. And so it's just sort of like every little bit matters. And so that's the important part. Every little bit of change we do makes a big difference. So do it somewhere, do it somehow, whatever you can, you know, come down to our gift shop. We got a lot of great alternative choices for holiday things if you need. Thank you everybody for your kind accolades and appreciate everybody's input and together we can make it change happen. And feel free if you come up with any ideas or any other questions, email me sue@noyocenter.org. I will happily continue to be in dialogue and think some of these things through together. So, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.